December 23, 2006. A date that would forever be etched in the memories of those who lived through it. A night etched in tragedy. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath. A night that began like any other for Ryan Waller and his girlfriend, Heather. They were a young couple, full of dreams and plans for the future, unaware of the impending doom that was about to shatter their world. But darkness was closing in. The night seemed to grow colder, the shadows longer, as if the universe itself was conspiring against them. Two figures, Richie and Larry Carver, approached Ryan's home. Their steps were deliberate, their intentions sinister. Their intentions were far from festive. They were driven by malice, their hearts devoid of mercy. They forced their way into the house, shattering the quiet night. Gunshots pierced the air, a violent symphony that echoed through the neighborhood. Heather, caught in the crossfire, was killed instantly, her dreams, her future, all extinguished in a heartbeat. A young life, taken too soon. The world lost a bright light that night, a soul full of potential and love. Ryan, just 18 years old, lay on the floor, a bullet lodged in his head, his life hanging by a thread, his future uncertain. He was alive but barely. The police arrived, their faces etched with determination and urgency. The Carvers fled, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable horror. Their escape was swift, their hearts as cold as the night. Neighbors, alerted by the gunshots, rushed to help. Their faces were masks of shock and disbelief, their minds struggling to comprehend the violence that had shattered their peaceful community. The police arrived, sirens wailing, lights flashing. The scene was chaotic, a stark contrast to the quiet that had preceded the violence. But for Heather, it was too late. Her body was taken away, a silent testament to the brutality of that night. And for Ryan, the nightmare was just beginning. Instead of being rushed to the hospital, he was taken in for interrogation. His life hanging in the balance, the true extent of the horror that had unfolded began to sink in. The night of terror was far from over. Instead of being rushed to the hospital, where he could have received immediate medical attention and possibly saved his life, Ryan was inexplicably taken to the police station. The decision was baffling, leaving many to question the judgment of the officers involved, a decision that defies logic and common sense. The officers seemed unsure and conflicted, their faces a mix of confusion and frustration, a decision that would have devastating consequences for Ryan and his family. Outside the station, his family and a concerned crowd gathered, their faces etched with worry and grief. Ryan, bleeding profusely and in agonizing pain, was subjected to an intense and relentless interrogation. His injuries were severe, yet he was treated with suspicion rather than compassion. He was not treated as a victim, but as a suspect. The officer's harsh treatment only added to his suffering. The detective, skeptical and dismissive, leaned across the table, peppering him with questions. His stern face showed no empathy, only a desire to extract information. "Who shot you?" he demanded. "What happened?" The questions were fired rapidly, giving Ryan little time to respond. Ryan, his speech slurred, his head throbbing, struggled to answer. His vision blurred, and he fought to stay conscious, the pain overwhelming. He pointed weakly to the wound on his head, trying to convey the gravity of his situation. "They shot me," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "Richie and Larry Carver." His words were a desperate plea for help, but they fell on deaf ears. The detective remained unconvinced. He questioned Ryan's story, suggesting he was confused. He even suggested that Ryan might have been shot with a BB gun. Ryan, his frustration mounting, insisted he was telling the truth. He described the gun, a revolver. He described the shooting, the impact, the searing pain. But his pleas fell on deaf ears. The detective continued his relentless questioning. He seemed more interested in securing a confession than in getting Ryan medical attention. As the interrogation dragged on, Ryan's condition deteriorated. He was clearly in distress. He was sweating profusely. He was struggling to stay conscious. Still, the detective persisted. He seemed oblivious to the young man's plight. He seemed more concerned with his own agenda than with Ryan's well-being. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, an ambulance was called. But even then, there were delays. Precious minutes ticked by, minutes that could have made all the difference. Section 5, 35 Days of Anguish. Ryan was finally taken to the hospital, but the damage had been done. The delayed medical attention had taken its toll. He developed an infection, a consequence of the gunshot wound and the negligence he had endured. He spent 35 agonizing days in the hospital, days filled with pain, fear, and uncertainty. The infection raged, threatening to consume him. Doctors fought to save his life, but the road to recovery was long and arduous. Section 6. A life upended. The aftermath. Ryan eventually recovered from the infection, but his ordeal was far from over. He was left with permanent brain damage, a constant reminder of that horrific night. He suffered from seizures, a debilitating side effect of his injury. His life, once filled with promise, was now defined by his injuries. He struggled to cope with the physical and emotional scars. He struggled to find his place in a world that seemed to have moved on without him. Section 7. Justice for Heather, Injustice for Ryan. Richie Carver was eventually apprehended and brought to justice. He was convicted of Heather's murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A small measure of justice for one life lost. But what about Ryan? His suffering was ignored, his pleas for help dismissed. He was denied the basic right to medical care, treated with callous indifference by the very people sworn to protect him. Section 8. A call for accountability. The tragic case of Ryan Waller is a stark reminder of the importance of police accountability. It is a chilling example of what can happen when those in power abuse their authority. Ryan's story demands justice. It demands a thorough investigation into the police department's handling of the case. It demands accountability for the detective who chose interrogation over compassion. Section 9. Ryan's legacy, a catalyst for change. This happened in 2006 and he died in 2016, a full 10 years after this tragedy. Ryan Waller's story is a tragedy, but it is also a call to action. His untimely death has sparked a movement, a collective awakening among the community and beyond. People are no longer willing to stand by and watch as injustices unfold. They are coming together, united by a shared purpose, to demand change and accountability. The candlelight vigils held in his memory are not just moments of mourning, but powerful symbols of solidarity and hope. They represent a community's resolve to ensure that Ryan's death was not in vain. It is a call for change in the way law enforcement interacts with victims of crime. The tragic circumstances surrounding Ryan's death have highlighted the urgent need for reform. People are advocating for a system that is more transparent, accountable, and just. They are calling for better training for officers, improved protocols for handling crime scenes, and a shift in the culture of policing. The goal is to create a law enforcement system that truly serves and protects all members of the community, without prejudice or bias. It is a call for a system that prioritizes compassion and care over suspicion and indifference. The community is advocating for a more humane approach to law enforcement, one that recognizes the dignity and worth of every individual. They are pushing for policies that emphasize de-escalation, mental health support, and community engagement. The aim is to build trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve, fostering a sense of mutual respect and understanding. Ryan's legacy should be one of reform. His story has become a rallying cry for those who seek to create a more just and equitable society. It is a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping the future. By standing up for what is right, by demanding accountability and transparency, we can honor Ryan's memory and ensure that his death was not in vain. The movement for justice reform is growing, and it is driven by the belief that change is not only possible, but necessary. A legacy that ensures that no other victim of violence is subjected to the same horrific treatment. The community is committed to preventing future tragedies by advocating for systemic change. They are working to create a society where victims of violence are treated with the compassion and respect they deserve. This includes pushing for better support services for victims and their families, as well as stronger protections against violence and abuse. The goal is to create a safer, more just world for everyone. A legacy that honors his memory by demanding better from those who are sworn to serve and protect. The community is calling for a higher standard of conduct from law enforcement officers, one that reflects the values of justice, integrity, and respect for human rights. They are advocating for policies that hold officers accountable for their actions and ensure that they are properly trained to handle the complexities of their role. By demanding better, they are working to create a future where tragedies like Ryan's are a thing of the past.